Jackie, are you ready for me to start?
All set.
All set. Okay. Well, welcome everyone. Delighted to have you here this evening. This is the 25th Spirit and Place Festival called Origins. And we are delighted to be hosting this evening's event with a few other partners that I'm going to tell you. The Origins of Creativity, channeling creativity under constraints. There are a number of organizations who have made this event possible. The Alan and Linda Cohen Center for Jewish Learning and Living, with the support of the Judaism and Civic Engagement Fund of Congregation Beth-El, the Harrison Art Center, and the Indianapolis Public Library. Tariq Robinson was the representative of the library in our discussions. I want to especially thank Jackie Goldstein, who is Beth-El Zedek's Programming and Communications Director. She has been coordinating all our conversations, coordinating the event, helping us with technology, along with Shari Levine. And we are very grateful for herding us together and getting us all in the same place. This is a Spirit and Place event, and Jackie is going to share with us a video message from Spirit and Place.
Humanities and Religion Festival. My name is Erin Kelly, and I'm the program director for Spirit and Place. We know this year's festival is different than other years, but you're here, we're here, and that's what matters. We'd like to begin this festival with a new practice. That is acknowledging that we are standing on the traditional homelands of the Miami, Potawatomi, Shawnee, and others, people who were unjustly removed from this land. Our origin story as a community begins with them. We also want to thank our sponsors who helped make the festival possible: Lilly Endowment Incorporated, Allen Whitehill Clues, Bolson Group, the Indianapolis Foundation, a CICF affiliate, and the IU School of Liberal Arts at IUPUI. We hope you enjoy the variety of events exploring this year's Origins theme. You can learn more about all of the festival events by going to spiritandplace.org. By going to the website, you can also read our community agreements. And these are agreements that we hope you will use to help structure a respectful and mindful festival experience. By visiting our website, spiritandplace.org, you can also take an online survey and tell us what you thought about the event you attended. We rely on this feedback to guide our work and strongly encourage you to go to spiritandplace.org to tell us about your experience. Thank you for supporting Spirit and Place, and have a wonderful festival.
Well, thank you, Erin, and Spirit and Place. I was actually a chair of Spirit and Place early on, and was at its first event. I can't believe it's 25 years ago. Well, delighted to have you with us. This program is going to be in two parts. First, we will have a panel with Dr. Larry Einhorn, Joanna Taft, and Rabbi Dennis Sasso. Then there will be opportunities for questions and conversations. And following that will be a more hands-on experience with Dr. Kate Neville, Dr. Adam Henze, and George Kelly. So we hope you'll stay with us for the length of the program. You are all muted and you cannot unmute yourselves. So if you want to ask questions, and we hope that you do, you will put them in the chat. So as people are speaking, our panelists are each going to speak for about 15 minutes apiece. Put the question when it comes to mind, and then we will get to that at the end of the initial presentations. Let me begin with some thoughts. When I started to think about how I would introduce this program, what mostly came to mind for me were questions. Why do we create? Is creativity and ordering out of chaos, as it says in Genesis, out of formlessness and void, or the creation of something altogether new, ex nihilo? What ignites the creative impulse to do something different? What extinguishes it? What keeps us set in our ways? If what Douglas Hofstadter, a scholar of cognitive science, physics, and comparative literature, If what he suggests is true, that creativity is better called discoverability, the ability to discover things that are in some sense there for anyone to find. Why do some people find those things and see them and others do not? If creativity is choosing the path of curiosity over fear, as the author Elizabeth Gilbert suggests, what helps us overcome our fear of the unknown and untried? So do we agree? And if so, how might we see the world as a great work of art to which everyone contributes in some way? We often think that complete freedom is the foundation for the greatest creativity, but studies show that the best ideas are born in constraint. So may this time of massive constraint turn out to be our most creative. Our panelists, a physician and scientist, a community arts leader, a religious and civic leader, will introduce us to this conversation of challenging creativity under constraints. Now I'm going to introduce each panelist before that person speaks. So our first panelist is Dr. Larry Einhorn. Dr. Einhorn, by the way, I could give you like a half-hour introduction to each of these panelists. I have constrained myself, under constraints, I've constrained myself, and we're just going to give a brief introduction. Dr. Einhorn is the Distinguished Professor of Medicine at IU, where he has been since 1973. He's received numerous awards for his research, including the American Cancer Society Medal of Honor. His legacy is linked with revolutionizing testicular cancer treatment. Prior to Dr. Einhorn's research, patients with metastatic testicular cancer could count on approximately a 10% survival rate. Now, due to Dr. Einhorn's findings, the current survival rate for metastatic testicular cancer is 80%. Dr. Einhorn has saved thousands of lives. He is an extraordinary physician, teacher, and researcher. And I might add, he is what we call in Jewish tradition, a mensch, an extraordinary human being who is always there for anyone in need. Thank you, Dr. Einhorn, for being with us.
Thanks very much for that wonderful introduction, Sandy. And so we are in very difficult and complicated times right now since the pandemic started. And the idea of looking at the origins of creativity in difficult times, I think is very appropriate for the time period that we're in right now. And so we're going to be hearing conversations on art, which can inspire us, in religion, which can comfort us. But I'm the science guy, so I'm going to be talking about science. Jackie, if you can show the first slide, please. So rather than using the term creativity, I'm going to look at how we develop innovative therapy. And innovative therapy can both be for trying to prevent disease as well as treating disease. And if I were to come up with a slide that really replicates the theme of the origins of creativity, this would be it right here. And of course, this is Michelangelo's famous painting at the Sistine Chapel. The origins of creativity are well exemplified here. And we see the finger of God touching the finger of Adam and conveying knowledge, but don't eat from that apple tree. But in conveying knowledge, perhaps he's also conveying art, science, and compassion. So let us move 500 years into after Michelangelo's painting to more contemporaneous times. Next slide, please. So this is from the movie E.T., Extraterrestrial. And this is a different celestial finger touching the finger not of quote unquote man, but a young child, a young boy. And this is not transmitting knowledge, art, religion, innovation. This is transmitting something that's more important perhaps in this time more than any other time. And that's the conveyance of magic. And this movie and this whole concept truly was magic. Next slide, please. Well, what does the word innovate really mean? It means that we introduce something new or different that wasn't in place previously. And I would have to tell you that not all innovations are necessarily good innovations. There is the old Frankenstein theme about innovating something that can be not creative, but can be destructive. But why, as physicians and scientists, do we want to innovate? Why do we want to be the lead dog? Next slide. Next slide, please. This is from the Iditarod, and you can read this yourself. If you are not the lead dog, the scenery never changes. Next slide, please. This cute little baby is one of the dangers of innovation and having the hubris to think that what you know is better than what other people know. So in the 1950s, when women who were trying to get pregnant and conceive and have these beautiful little children and would have spontaneous miscarriages, there were a couple of scientists who felt that the problem was not enough estrogen. DES, as shown on this slide, stands for diethylstilbestrol, which is a form of estrogen. So unfortunately, not only did the estrogen fail to prevent spontaneous miscarriages, and now with better science, we have a better idea of chromosomal abnormalities that lead to these miscarriages, but it also created disease in the offspring. About 25 to 30 years ago, there was a scientist who found a disease he had never seen before. Teenage girls coming out with a type of cancer of the vagina, of all places, when they were 13, 14, 15 years old. And rather than trying to treat this disease only, this particular physician, Dr. Herbst, wanted to know why this was happening. And this is incredible detective work, because he found that it was something that was maternal ingestion rather than environmental cause. And yet this was because of the estrogen. Now, as a doctor who specializes in testis cancer, this is also true for young men who were born from diethylstilbestrol mothers, because this also produced congenital abnormalities in the bladder, the kidneys, and caused undescended testes. And undescended testes is the only known risk factor for testicular cancer. So this is a slide showing the bad side of innovation and being not humble enough to realize that what you are hypothesizing as a theorem may not only be neutral, but actually may be harmful. Next slide, please. Well, several years ago, Dr. Sid Mukherjee, was a fellow in training at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in Boston. And he wrote a book which was a bestseller entitled The Emperor of All Maladies. And you can read this for yourself, but basically it states, in the end, cancer truly emerges, as a 19th century surgeon once wrote in a book's frontispiece, as the emperor of all maladies, the king of terrors. That was true in the 19th century. That was true in the 20th century. But I hope to convince you that it's not true in 2020, and in fact, for the better part of the 21st century. Next slide, please. Well, as Sandy kindly mentioned, I've been involved from the beginning of my career in the university, where I joined the faculty in 1973, working on treatment for patients with testicular cancer. So this is not a common disease, only accounting for 1% of all male malignancies. But it happens to be the most common cancer in young men. Prostate cancer, of course, is the most common cancer in men in general. But because of the number of productive years of life lost if someone dies at age 25 versus age 85, this is a very important disease. We've been able to demonstrate that we can cure patients with a combination of surgery and chemotherapy who would not be cured with one modality alone. We also don't have to look at a hypothesis like diethylstilbestrol, but we can do well-designed random prospective control study to show that new treatment is better than the older treatment. And those of us who are healers and deal with cancer patients, we strive to make quality of life better and to prolong survival. But in testis cancer, we don't try to achieve those goals. Our only goal is cure. And cure by definition means the ability to lead a normal lifespan, the same as if someone that had never had cancer in the first place. Next slide, please. So this is our original platinum study that we started way back in 1974, combining the first heavy metal, platinum, to ever be used as an anti-cancer drug, combined with two older drugs called vinblastine and bleomycin. Next slide, please. So this is a slide from the National Cancer Institute, and it might be a little bit difficult to read and understand over here, and I don't have a pointer. But in 1974, when I joined the faculty, we started these studies, and this upward movement in the survival curve is when the first abstract and the first paper was presented in a scientific meeting and published in a scientific journal, showing this dramatic upward survival in the curve. And on a more personal basis, next slide. This is one of our early patients, and this is a chest X-ray, and the black is normal air in the lung, and the white is tumor. And when we take a chest X-ray, we take a frontal view, and we have the patient turn to the side and take a side view. Next slide, please. On the side view, there's almost no normal lung. This is a patient who came to us in 1974, early in the treatment realm of this particular disease. And this patient looked like he had about 2 weeks to live without any treatment. And quite honestly, if this were anything other than testis cancer, we would not have offered any treatment. Next slide, please. But this was testis cancer. And here's his slide several years later, and he remains 40 years later, very productive, disease-free, and long since cured of his cancer. Next slide, please. Well, as Sandy mentioned, things have changed quite a bit since the discovery of platinum and the use of this as a chemotherapy agent. So for patients who present with stage 1 or stage 2 disease, which means it's confined to the testis, or stage 2 means it's spread only to abdominal lymph nodes, or stage 3, such as the case I showed you a few seconds ago that is spread to the lungs, the cure rate at the present time for metastatic disease is 80% compared to the 10% prior to platinum. And the overall cure rate is 95% for all patients who are diagnosed today with testicular cancer of any stage. Next slide, please. Well, the history of platinum for innovation is really an amazing story. A biophysicist at Michigan State by the name of Barney Rosenberg wanted to look at the effects of an electric current to see whether that would denature DNA and allow radiotherapy or chemotherapy agents to more actively penetrate the cell membrane. So he set up a water bath solution, dumped E. coli bacteria, and ran this electric current and saw what the effect would be upon the E. coli. And this was an amazing biological effect that he could not possibly account for by merely the electric current per se. So this is where serendipity favors the prepared mind. He looked at the electrodes to see what they were made of. Yep, they were made out of platinum. So platinum first entered clinical trials in 1972, caused terrible kidney failure, deafness, numbness and tingling and pain in the fingertips, horrible nausea and vomiting. And in fact, the early toxicity outweighed what then was felt to be the modest therapeutic advantage. But just as platinum has saved the lives of thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of young men with testis cancer saved platinum, because were it not for these dramatic results with platinum, the drug probably would have disappeared. And we learned over the first several years that we were doing these studies how to greatly mitigate these side effects, and for the large part, even eliminate a lot of the side effects, such as kidney failure that happened early on. Next slide, please. So today in 2020, despite the enthusiasm, which is incredible enthusiasm for the science of oncology with molecular targeted agents rather than chemotherapy, and the transformational studies with immunotherapy, platinum remains first-line therapy for metastatic disease in these 11 very different types of cancer. Next slide, please. Well, lung cancer is the scourge for oncologists. It is the #1 cause of cancer death by far. But innovation is happening in this disease also, as we are learning what genes become aberrant and lead to the development and progression of cancer, and developing drugs that can block these particular oncogenes These is referred to as molecular targeted therapy rather than chemotherapy. And of course, the use of immunotherapy to stimulate the patient's own innate immune system and better fight cancer. Next slide, please. Well, this is to me, and maybe not to you, but this is the Surgeon General's warning. Cigarette smoking is a health hazard of sufficient importance to warrant appropriate remedial action. 46 years ago, 46 years ago. And when we think about looking at prevention as opposed to treatment, all of the cancers, head and neck cancer, bladder cancer, pancreatic cancer that Alex Trebek just died from yesterday, and especially lung cancer that could have been prevented by simply heeding this warning rather than waiting 4 decades for things to really start turning around. Next slide, please. Well, this is an interesting painting by Vincent van Gogh called Skull with Cigarette. And perhaps he had pretty good epidemiology back 120 years ago when this was done. And we'll get back to Vincent van Gogh in the next couple of slides. Next slide, please. Well, it's hard to ignore the 500-pound gorilla in the room, and that's coronavirus. And COVID-19, which stands for, of course, coronavirus virus disease, which first came out in Wuhan, China in 2019, is a unique SARS coronavirus. And we heard incredible news today, and what a great timing to have this talk. Pfizer's study with their vaccine on 45,000 participants, a random prospective double-blind study, which means neither the patient nor the doctor knew which the participant was getting, showed 90% effectiveness, not just in developing antibodies against the virus, but having the nasal swab done and not having symptomatic or asymptomatic COVID. So this is a major breakthrough. We've also had other therapeutics that have been reformatted. Remdesivir, which you might have heard of, is a failed Ebola viral drug, which is FDA approved now for coronavirus. Dexamethasone, a steroid, which has been around for many, many decades, reduces the inflammation in the lungs and certainly lessens the course of the disease in those who are seriously ill. But this is a real scientific achievement with the discovery of the vaccine. Next slide, please. Well, this is a picture not from this century, but from 100 years ago. And we just had the Tampa Bay, Los Angeles World Series. And you notice how these players are wearing their masks. And I wish everyone were wearing a mask today, because again, we're talking about not just therapy, but prevention. So as a scientist, as a physician, you might wonder, where do I go to get information about coronavirus and preventing coronavirus? And of course, I immediately turn to, next slide, Fox News. Wear the damn mask, follow the science. Chris Wallace, Fox News. And I want to remind everyone in the audience that you may have your own excuse, personal freedom, inconvenience for not wearing the damn mask. We are going to have a vaccine. It is going to be transformational in eliminating the pain and suffering of this scourge. But you do not want to be the last person to die from this disease because you did not wear the damn mask. This goes back to the bubonic plague. We know how to handle pandemics and to flatten the curve, as Fauci often tells us. And the most important thing is wearing the mask. Why do we wear a mask? To protect ourselves, and because we can have no symptoms, but be shedding virus and passing it on to other people. And perhaps something that's not really discussed is this is a virus that enters our body through the mouth, the nose, and to a lesser degree, the eyes. So you don't get coronavirus by touching something with your fingertips. You don't get virus at the fingertips. You get it by touching your nose and your mouth. And if nothing else, a mask prevents you from touching your nose and your mouth when you're touching things out in common practice and normal life. So nobody has an excuse for not wearing a mask, but perhaps one person did. Next slide. And here we get back to our friend Vincent van Gogh. Well, the very last slide, and I'm not going to preach on this, final slide, please, is climate change. So we've talked about cigarettes and trying to prevent lung cancer and other cancer while we've eventually developed more successful therapeutics for it. We went through the miraculous studies of platinum with a biophysicist looking at electric current and coming up with a drug that has saved hundreds of thousands of lives, and that we were able to put this together in clinical trials at Indiana University. And we, of course, talked about the pandemic that we were all suffering from. So eventually, we're not going to be at risk for losing our lives or our livelihoods as this vaccine is developed and put into general use. Climate change doesn't threaten us individually, it threatens the entire planet. And I hope that we have learned lessons from the earlier parts of this talk that prevention is going to be more important than therapeutics. I fear we are not going to be able to innovate our way out of climate change. So I do want to end on the positive note about the virus. That is very exciting information. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Larry. Thanks so much, and for all you have done for so many people in keeping us healthy and giving us knowledge. And I don't know, what you did seems to me like a little bit of magic.
Thank you.
Our next, and I have tons of questions, but I'm going to once again constrain myself and wait until everybody has a chance to speak. So our next panelist is Joanna Taft. Joanna, when she moved into her home in the Heron Morton neighborhood, a third of the houses were vacant. A second third had already been demolished. Today, that neighborhood is in high demand, in large part due to one person, Joanna Taft. I know she has lots of partners, but the Holy Redeemer Presbyterian Church, the Harrison Arts Center, Heron High School, and the Oaks Academy were all made possible because of Joanna's vision and her determination. She is the founding executive director of the Harrison Center and founding board chair emeritus of Heron High School. The Harrison Center is a wonderful place that I love to visit. Is a place for artists to have studios to do the work, and it's also an incubator for ideas about how artists can contribute to local economic and civic growth. If you have never been to a First Friday at the Harrison Center, you have to go. It's amazing. You will thank me for that advice. It's really quite incredible. In that place, you will see the vision and hospitality of one really amazing woman, Joanna Taft. Joanna?
Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen here and click all the buttons. So the Harrison Center is for the arts, but we're also for the city. And to be honest with you, the whole story has been about constraints. And so I'm going to kind of show how we've figured out a few ways to serve the community creatively through constraints. So we're located at the corner of 16th and Delaware downtown. This was an abandoned building, and the last 20 years we've filled it with artists. If you walk through the building, there's every different kind of studio, and regardless of size, shape, or smell, and some of them do smell, you'll find that artists use them. So we have 36 artists in the building, but we also have 6 galleries that change art monthly. And when you have this much going on in the building, that means maybe I don't have room for an office. I actually don't have an office. I sit on a couch in one of the galleries because there's no space for me to have an office. And so people have said over time, you know, how do you find room to do community building? How do you find room to do community events? So I'm going to show you a little video of one way we've done it.
Down from the rafters, a wooden surprise embarks on a journey towards dinner tonight. Reclaimed and restored from wood long forgotten, now fashioned and crafted, a beautiful sight. Gather around
So I'm going to stop the video.
the
I'm going to stop the video for a second. So we didn't have room I wanted to build this big table. I wanted to build it out of pieces of the building from the extra wood from the ceiling. But there was no place to store this table. And so I realized that we had space in the ceiling. Our ceilings were 20 feet tall, and I could store a table up there. So come for an art dish event, and you can see more ways that we've innovated, how constraints have given birth to our best ideas. So another example of constraints is, we started in 2001 and we were doing really well. Nouveau called us, one of the most exciting arts destinations downtown. But in 2003, my artists threatened to move. They threatened to move to LA, New York, or Chicago. And I said, what are you talking about? Haven't you read the press? Don't you know we have great place? And they said, Joanna, we need art patrons. Indianapolis doesn't have art patrons. And so we decided to start a school designed to grow world-class citizens or art patrons. So we started Heron High School, which is around the corner from us in the old John Heron Art Institute building. And that has grown into a network of schools called Indianapolis Classical Schools with both Riverside High School and Heron High School, and starting at elementary school next year. And so again, this constraint, we needed art patrons. How do we think generationally? How do we think outside the box to serve our community? With the high school came a lot of high school kids, and they were pretty excited about finding ways to serve the community. And people looked at me and they said, oh, Joanna, you guys have accomplished a lot. You need to keep doing these big things. And, I was kind of tired. Constraints can be hard. I was kind of tired. And so I thought, why don't we grow an army of cultural entrepreneurs? And so these high school kids began serving our community by repairing broken buildings with Legos. Have you ever thought about that? Or painting the snow when it wouldn't melt. Do you remember 4 or 5 years ago, we had snow for 3 months straight, and they decided to paint it to add some color to people's commute. Or one summer, it was just so hot. They lined a pickup truck with a tarp and made their own little pool and started driving around the city. They said they were going to go out and network to bless people. That's what they told me. The police pulled them over and told them to never do that again. But they had a great time in the 10 minutes that they had driving around town. Pickup trucks were really interesting that year. And another intern wanted to do relational art. And so she borrowed her dad's pickup truck. She drilled holes in it. She filled it with soil and planted plants, and then started taking it into apartment complexes to let the kids taste and see and experience what it's like to grow a garden. And it's relational art because it usually evokes a philanthropic response or some kind of good. In this case, it invoked anger from her dad for drilling holes, but the community really felt served by it. In 2008, somebody showed me this, and this is actually a map. It's not a pointillism piece of art. It's actually a map of abandoned houses in Indianapolis. And I thought, how could the Harrison Center help strengthen neighborhoods where there's such abandonment? Because every dot on this map represents a public safety issue. It represents an injustice issue, and it represents an education issue. And so we decided to start a new gallery designed to highlight place-based art, art that celebrates place, art that connects people to culture, community, and place. We started creating music about Indianapolis. So we've written over 300 songs about urban Indianapolis, having our artists and our musicians lead our city and celebrating our city. So for the first time, the Harrison Center started leaving our neighborhood and going to other neighborhoods to do creative placemaking. Our interns did Free Flower Fridays at 38th and Illinois. And when we weren't given permission to use a vacant storefront, where there were a lot of vacant storefronts, we built our own. This is a vacant storefront. We actually attached a shipping container. We built a facade and attached a shipping container, and we did gallery openings and poetry readings and a pop-up coffee shop and puppet shows. Let me go back for a second. One thing that surprised me was all this vitality wasn't well received. The neighbors were afraid that in strengthening the neighborhood, that their story was going to be erased. That completely shocked me. I'd never thought about that before. And so we completely changed our approach, and we began to use art to know and to love people, not to revitalize, which there's nothing wrong with strengthening a neighborhood, but we use art now to know and love people. And so here is our first attempt at that.
Big shout Cheatham and Moore. Big shout Mr. Moore. Gotta let the people know. Doing the barbershop of blessing.
And you can watch more of that on our Vimeo channel. So that was the Barbershop of Blessing. And that whole experience of understanding that art is powerful. And if you don't understand the power of art, it can actually help, it can hurt people. It can make people feel not included. And so we decided to start using art to elevate the stories of neighborhoods and elevate the stories of long-term residents so that we could have a type of revitalization that was more equitable. And so there was a neighborhood just east of the Harrison Center that was being targeted, getting ready to be targeted by developers. And we sent our artists in to know and love people. We created more than 18 portraits of long-term residents and hung them on the vacant lot, on the vacant buildings to share those stories. And we partnered with theater. We'd never partnered with theater before. We partnered with 13 theater companies to help us figure out a way to act out a world that ought to be. And so, you know, we don't know what an equitable and a just neighborhood looks like. I've never seen it. I've looked around the country, I've never seen it. And so we asked theater to show us what it looked like, so it would give us something to work toward. We needed a stage. We took a 3-block stretch of a blighted section of 16th Street, and every street, every piece of the street and sidewalk and building was a part of our stage. And then the actors and the set designers worked together to elevate the neighbors' hopes and dreams, understanding the pain, but elevating their hopes and dreams. And you can see this ground plan, kind of crazy, but every single section of that 3-block stretch was used to elevate the neighborhood story. We built over 11 temporary buildings on the vacant lots and acted out a world that ought to be. Here is a snippet.
Somehow we've got to find a way to recognize how we got here today in order for us to understand where we ought to go. Yes. In order for us to form new realities, to form new normals, to help create a neighborhood we've never seen before for our children and our children's children, for our children and our children's children. Form a new normal, new normal, new normal, new normal. Yeah, I know you, 'cause you look just like my brother. Yeah, and I know you, that you look just like my sister. No, and together we can make new realities. Let's say together we can form a new normal, new normal, new normal, new normal. Yeah, I know you.
I know you.
Girl, you look just like my auntie.
Like my auntie.
Yeah, and I know you.
I know.
Girl, you look just like my nephew. No, and together we can make new realities. I said together we can form a new normal, new normal, new normal, new normal. Hey.
And once again, I'm going to stop the video and let you finish watching it on the Harrison Center website. So we were growing a lot as an organization. We were understanding the community's problems, and we were trying to use those constraints to help us innovate and to respond creatively. And then coronavirus hit. And quite frankly, nothing like this had ever been on my radar before. And so we began to understand that we had to completely reinvent everything the Harrison Center had done. People needed art more than ever, and we couldn't pull back from our programming. We had to enter in, but in a new and safe way. So some of you know that we do a lot of porching. And every spring, we kick off our Porch Party initiative with the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And in April, I realized we weren't going to be able to do that. It wasn't safe to gather people. But our neighbors needed each other. So how could we find a way, a creative way to gather them? So back our typical porch parties, we'd have our neighbors sitting closely and gathering and people building community. But with coronavirus, we realized that people were sitting in their houses behind their laptops and on their couches, and they weren't getting up from their couch at 5 o'clock. They didn't have a rhythm to end their day. And so we created social distance porching, and we asked them to get up from their couch and to go to their front porch or their yard or their balcony or their stoop and practice their Hey Neighbor wave as a way to stay connected. We advertise this around the community through billboards. We paid an artist to create these billboards. And then we hired another artist, a photographer, to go around town and capture how people were social distance porching in every corner of Indianapolis.
I'll throw a party on my porch today. Everyone's invited. 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 Everyone's invited.
So we porched starting in April and all through the summer. It was really amazing. The next thing we realized is that we were used to gathering people together to hear stories and to watch film and to share experiences together. And we couldn't do that. And so we decided to create our own drive-in theater. We projected films about the neighborhood on the side of the old Polk building at the corner of 15th and Lewis, which is right off the Monon. And if you go tonight or if you go tomorrow night, you can watch 6 films, turn your radio to 88.1 and you can hear the audio. And these are all films that are celebrating the Martindale-Brightwood neighborhood. We're known for doing a little bit of a holiday window walk in the winter, but in April, we realized we needed to have those windows serving people again a little bit earlier. And so we hired our artists to create coronavirus windows. And we wanted people to be able to process with art and to mourn with art and to get angry and to laugh and to cry. We needed people to be able to be expressing their emotions and to be processing this together. Another thing that we had to reinvent was our First Fridays. We're so used to having 900 to 1,300 people attend a First Friday, and we couldn't do that. It wasn't safe. And so we realized that journalists, this is what a First Friday might typically look like, but people weren't allowed in our building, but journalists were. Journalists had a free pass. And so we gave Jill Dittmeyer access, and WFYI went through our shows and was able to film them and to talk people through them. And then we had another even better idea. I was watching the news and I realized that the broadcasters were working from home, and many of them had blank walls. And so we offered to courier art to them. So for instance, Chuck Lofton, every Friday we delivered 5 pieces of art, and he would change the art Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and he would talk about the artists. And this actually helped our artists sell during a really hard time. And yes, we started an online gallery. I had said for 14 years, we would never have an an online gallery. The Harrison Center is very relational. We wanted people to come into our building. We wanted them to meet the artists in person. And I'd always fought the online thing, but we knew in April that we needed to move to an online presence. And so we quickly put together a gallery. Our first sale was from San Francisco. And while we still need to put more advertising dollars around that to support it, the wonderful thing about this gallery is going forward, we'll have both the in-person and the online option, and we'll be serving artists better. And this was born out of constraints. Okay, here is one of my best ideas. The first day I heard social distance, I was in my office and I saw a hula hoop out of the corner of my eye. And I got up and I walked over and I grabbed the hula hoop and I put it around me. And I told my interns, I said, don't get near me. I need social distance. And I was laughing. I didn't understand how serious it was going to be. And a couple weeks later, I started thinking about hoop skirts. And we commissioned an artist to create 10 hoop skirt, we call them hoop sculptures, they're gender neutral. And we began taking walks around the neighborhood to demonstrate and to model social distancing. And it also made people really happy. And as people were afraid and inside their homes, they're able to look outside and see something that was very creative, something that gave them a different perspective. And then we added flowers, we added lights to them. And you can watch more of that on Vimeo. And then we added flowers. So some of our long-term residents had not been able to go to the store to buy flowers like they typically would. And so we took flowers to them. The Harrison Center has a big old smokestack and we had just restored it. And we decided to do something a little bit special with it, make some safe public art. We put a fog machine in the base. We put LED lights at the top, and we're able to do a beautiful light installation that could be safely viewed from blocks around. So this is another thing that we unveiled during COVID. And you can watch more of that on our Vimeo. Everyone was getting into masks. And of course, we wanted to serve the community. We made masks for hospitals and we delivered masks that other people made. And then some of our artists had their own perspective on masks. And so we had helped people work through their fears and their emotions by having a mask for everyone. Okay, this is an idea that was also mine, but it didn't work. This is a drone. I don't know if you can see it, but we decided how could we serve our long-term residents in a safe way? We couldn't get close to them. And so we decided to make scones and serve them by drone. So we actually had this drone deliver scones. But what I didn't realize is that this drone was finely tuned for a very particular weight. And even though to me a scone didn't seem very heavy, we actually ruined our drone from this. After 6 deliveries, the drone just couldn't take off anymore. But it was a great idea, wasn't it? Scones by drone. So we had to move to another approach of delivery. We went the old-fashioned way, and we made quarantine bags, and we filled them with arts and humanities materials. And we wanted them to be things that evoked people's senses. And so we wanted them to use, I don't think the mind is a sense. I don't know, maybe Larry can tell me, give me some science on that. But we gave them history material about their neighborhood, but we wanted them to see things that would surprise them. So we gave them paper dolls that connected our artists, one of Sandy's favorites, Kyle Ragsdale, with some of our long-term residents. And you could cut them out, or you could take your paper doll to a gallery show, you could take your paper doll to a porch party. But we also wanted people to smell things. And so we commissioned some soap. I'd never commissioned soap before, but centrifugation soap is the smell of sweet potato pie wafting through the neighborhood. And centrifugation soap is our way of saying gentrification stinks. You need to lather up in sweet community. You need to enter into your history, the story of your neighborhood using all of your senses. And so we encourage people to use their senses of smell, their senses to reconnect to their neighborhood story. We gave them coloring books so they could draw.
Joanna, can I want to make sure we get to our last panelist.
Yes, I'm done.
I don't want to interrupt you, but you'll have some time afterwards in the conversation if you don't mind.
Yep, we can end right now.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, you have so much creativity. Oh my God, I'm feeling like, what have I done during the coronavirus? I mean, I did some extra cooking, a little bit of writing, but nothing compared to what you've been doing. I'm really very impressed. One thing you said that reminded me of something Larry said, so I'm going to connect the two talks. Larry said that sometimes in science, innovation can hurt, like with the drug that ended up causing problems in young people after their mother took it. And you said as well, sometimes art can hurt if you're not paying attention to the community in which you're in. So these are two creative endeavors. And at the same time, we need to think how we use science and how we use art in order to benefit the community. Okay, that's just my little thought. And now I'm really happy to introduce Rabbi Dennis Sasso, who I've known for a really, really long time. We both came to Indianapolis in 1977. Neither of us knew anything about the Midwest. If you think the city was foreign to me, who came from Philadelphia, imagine what it was for Dennis Sasso, a native of the Republic of Panama and a descendant of a Spanish-Portuguese family who settled in the Caribbean after escaping the Inquisition. Now, I would say no one has as creative a background as he does on this call. Dennis brought with him a sharp intellect, a commitment to service, and a compassionate soul. And I will add a propensity for paranomasia, which, if you don't know what that is his favorite word for punning. If you don't know him, you'll come to recognize that special creative gift. As senior rabbi of Congregation Beth-El for 43 years, he has helped to shape the synagogue into a center for Jewish life, interfaith engagement, and civic engagement. He's a beloved professor at Christian Theological Seminary, and he contributes to the Indianapolis Business Journal. He was ordained in 1974, the same time I was. At that time, he and I became the first rabbinical couple in world Jewish history. So a little bit of creativity. I'm happy to introduce Dennis. You have to unmute.
She doesn't usually tell me to unmute. Sandy, if I had known you thought so highly of me, I might have wanted to ask you out on a date some years ago. Thank you, Larry.
50 years. We've been married 50 years. There you
go. That's
in case you forgot.
Would never. Larry and Joanna, thank you for those powerful and fascinating presentations. And I would claim, as I will develop, that what you both do is, in my opinion, religious. I'll explain that as we go along. Well, I don't have a PowerPoint presentation and I don't have art to show you. I learned that power corrupts and PowerPoint can corrupt absolutely. So I will stick to my medium, which is words. For sure, the pandemic has challenged congregations and religious organizations to pivot, to retool, and to adapt their social justice efforts, worship experiences, and educational opportunities. Our services without walls are attracting large numbers of people, and I hear the same from colleagues. There seems to be a zooming interest in religious life. Our hope is that virtual programs, of course, will lead to virtuous living. The fact is that religion has long been shaped by external conditions that require new responses. The synagogue, as an institution arose out of the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem by the Romans in the first century. The temple functioned as a hierarchical, hereditary, sacrifice center institution led by an entrenched priestly class. The synagogue, by contrast, emerged as a non-hierarchical, democratic place of gathering, worship, and learning for all. And this is the same period of the birthing of the early Christian church as a Jewish sect. Tonight, rather than addressing the practical adjustments that religion has had to make as a result of the pandemic's constraints, I'd like to talk about the very nature of religion and its relationship to innovation and creativity. Little theology rather than technology. Now, most people think of religion as grounded in conservative purposes, the maintaining of rituals and traditions, the preservation of beliefs and doctrines. And there is the notion of religion as a source of comfort, providing refuge from the vicissitudes of life under the shelter of God's protective care. And many people think of this God as a supernatural being, providentially guarding us, a cosmic puppeteer or heavenly sugar daddy, doling out rewards or punishment as merited by our behaviors. But there is another version of religion that I'd like to share with you. It is one that cherishes the aesthetics of tradition, the importance of community, and the wisdom of the past, but it is more an agent of change than a preserver of the status quo. Is it a religion that is founded not on supernatural notions of divinity, but on a naturalistic understanding of the divine? Not a super being with magical agency, but a process at work in the universe and within and among us that makes for the fulfillment of our human potential. According to this understanding, God is not the unmoved mover of Aristotelian philosophy, not a commanding entity, but a presence calling us to move from where we are to where we can be, from who we are to what we can become, from what is to what ought to be. And creativity is at the very essence of religion. The Bible's opening words are, "In the beginning," a story of origins. Well, Genesis is not a scientific account, despite efforts of fundamentalists to treat it as such. It is a metaphor. It is imaginative and even playful. Much of religion is about the poetics of life. There are two narratives of origins in Genesis. The first is the account in chapter 1 of 7 days when God speaks the world into being. And it is a reminder of the power of words to create and to heal, to destroy, or to hurt. The second account in Genesis 2 and 3 tells of the Garden of Eden, of Adam and Eve, of the trees of life and of knowledge. This is a more mythological story. It is intent on teaching us not the facts of creation, but its purposes. The two trees in the Garden of Eden are symbols of humanity's role as creators. Had Adam and Eve obeyed and just eaten from the tree of life in the center of the garden, they would have attained blissful immortality. But eating from the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, they lose immortality and will now perpetuate themselves through procreation. The first fallible humans will be builders, not just of generations, but creators and producers of civilization. They now have to toil and struggle by the sweat of their brow to earn a living and make the land yield its fruit. And this tree of knowledge of good and evil is not about moral discernment. Good and evil is a merism, a term that encompasses the totality of knowledge. Humans become discoverers and explorers. And by the way, nowhere does it say that it was an apple tree. We are not told in the story what type of a tree it was, and there are all types of proposals. The reference to the apple comes from the Middle Ages because the word for apple, malum, is associated with evil, mal. Cain's descendants, remember it was Cain who killed his brother Abel, will include Jabal, the ancestor of those who dwell in tents amidst the herds, Jubal, the ancestor of all who play the harp and the pipe, the musical arts, and Tubal-Cain, who forged instruments of copper and iron, weapons. The city is on the horizon. The Genesis stories teach profound truths that are misunderstood if we take them verbatim. Like most good literature, the Bible is to be taken seriously, not literally. And just as science and the arts are constantly self-critical and self-correcting, so religion is at its best the ongoing self-critical, self-corrective project of arriving at a worldly standard of godliness that represents humanity at its best. It has been generally assumed that the Bible presumes a creatio ex nihilo, creation out of nothing. And that is based on a mistranslation of the very first word in the Bible. Bereshit does not mean in the beginning, as though there were nothing previously. It means at the beginning of the creative process, because the Bible assumes a pre-existent reality, a chaotic mess out of which the divine creative process brings about order, cosmos. So creation is not the making of something out of nothing. Creativity is the capacity to conceive and execute something new, something other. We always work with pre-existing materials, with a set of givens within a context of experience. Creativity, whether scientific, artistic, or religious, involves envisioning new possibilities, trying to make things different, more interesting, better. The culmination of creation is the Sabbath. While all other things are declared good in the story of creation, it is time, the Sabbath, that is first declared holy, and rest becomes an essential ingredient of the creative process, the pause that restores and renews and offers perspective. Rest affords rhythm to time and to the creative process. Otherwise, both time and labor would become a blur, iterative, boring. According to Alfred North Whitehead, the 20th century philosopher and theologian, God is that reality that offers us at each moment the highest relevant possibility for becoming. The divine aim is beauty, not just aesthetic, but moral. My teacher, Professor Clark Williamson, a Whitehead disciple, explains, the creative process seeks to harmonize diversity. It is like the crescendo of a great symphony. What keeps difference from becoming just noise is the harmony, which renders it beautiful. God is the poet of the universe, and we are all players in the orchestra, partners with the Grand Maestro in the ongoing processes of creation. My mentor, Rabbi Mordecai Kaplan, explains that by God we mean the sum of everything that renders life significant and worthwhile. And faith in God is the affirmation of those ideals of truth, goodness, and beauty interwoven in a pattern of holiness. Kaplan resonates with what Albert Einstein calls cosmic religion, an attitude of awe, wonder, and humility in the presence of the harmony of nature. And this does not mean the abdication of reason, but an acknowledgement that what is impenetrable to us manifests itself as the highest wisdom and most radiant beauty. This knowledge, says Einstein, this feeling is at the center of true religiosity. As a member of the clergy, I'm often asked about why religion has been the source of so much evil in the world. It has, but also of much goodness. Religion, like science and the arts or anything else, is as good as the people who practice it. Science can be used for good or for evil purposes. Art can be used to inspire beauty and evoke wonder, or to propagandize on behalf of evil. Richard Niebuhr reminds us that religion can make good people better and bad people worse. Science, the arts, religion, or for that matter, politics, money, and power can be used for good purposes or for evil designs, for blessing or for curse. It is up to us. Science deals with the reality of the world. Its tools are facts and data, experiment and verification. The arts deal with the ideality of the world, beauty and aesthetics, wonder, contemplation. Religion embraces reality and ideality and introduces the values of morality and the experience of holiness. Religion seeks to wrest meaning out of being and purpose out of existence. I would suggest that science is the how, the arts are the wow, and religion is the what now. They are all instrumentalities to bring about the good, the true, and the beautiful, and make them operative in our lives. Creativity is unending work, an unfinished task. C.S. Lewis reminded us, you can't go back and change the beginning, but you can start where you are and change the ending. We are always in the beginning of something new. Let us labor and rest to make it good, true, and beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. What wonderful panelists we've had. And I see a connection among the three panelists. I mean, Dennis spoke about at the core of religion is wonder and humility. And I think there's some of that in science and art as well. You know, wonder at the human body and what we can do, and wonder at the world around us, but a sense of humility that we learn from so many different inputs. So everybody is saying they love the presentations. And I have some questions, since I only see one question that I will get to. Okay, here's what I want to know. So you talked about certain constraints, but each of your fields has increasing constraints beyond the coronavirus. Healthcare has increasing standardization and regulations, from what I know. In diagnosis and treatment, I guess I'm going to make it to all three of you, but to Larry, does that mean there's less room for innovation? Don't answer me yet, because I'm going to ask everybody. But with all the restrictions we have and the fears of trying something, because what can happen, is that making for less innovation? Then in art, there are financial burdens. I mean, artists need to make money, right, in order to survive. And they therefore have to, in some way, have audiences. Does that constrain them in what they would otherwise do if they didn't have those concerns? And then in religion, religion needs to build a community. It's not just a solitary act. Does building a community limit individual creativity? Meaning, are some ideas just too out there to try because you have to keep community together? So it's kind of a question for everybody of how we are in somehow constrained in our creativity. Let me start with Larry.
Sure. Thank you very much for that question, Sandy. So to give you an example of what I've been involved with, which is platinum chemotherapy and curing testicular cancer, the first patient entered our study in 1974, a long time ago. And in my youthful exuberance at that time, I really thought that all of my innovative ideas were going to be positive. Much like Thomas Edison said, success is 999 failures before you have the one success. So the consent form, and you always have to do a consent form for any clinical trial, was 1 page long. When I wrote the protocol, It took 3 weeks from the time I wrote the protocol out on paper, put it in an envelope, put a stamp on it, sent it off to the regulatory agencies, sent it off to the NCI to get this experimental drug platinum. So let us move forward to 2020. A consent form is 15 pages long. It's written by lawyers, not by doctors. Patients don't even remember what's on the consent form. And if someone, as a young investigator, comes up with a new cure for breast cancer, for example, it might be a year and a half from the time it's sent off to the time the first patient is put on study. Now, having said that, when you look at the diethylstilbestrol, the estrogen experiment, when you have unfettered research and people who just are so smart they know what the answers are and don't have to wait for results, it's a difficult question to answer, but I think we have overregulated our industry. I think the idea that you have to have these lengthy consent forms, you have to have these lengthy hoops to jump over before you can even start a clinical trial is certainly not productive to innovation. And I would tell you, being in the field for 40 years, it gets worse every year. Every year, it just gets more hoops that you have to jump through.
Well, yeah, Adam just said he spent 2 years getting an IRB approval. So
Right.
I hear that from many people. Okay, and he's a social scientist. He doesn't even need all those consent forms. No, that's not an optimistic statement. Okay, thank you though. Joanna, do you think artists are constrained by the audiences that they want to buy their works?
So it was a huge challenge to lose our audience because we did. Our traditional way that we have done this was people came to us. That was our business model. And we had to completely reinvent our business model to serve our artists. And so we could have said, oh no, we need an audience. We can't do anything. Our audience is gone. But instead, because we felt like people needed art more than ever, we felt like we needed to find the audience. And so when we did the social distance hoop walks in the neighborhood, we were going to the audience. We were trying to help people process, when we created more activity on social media, when we did the performance art and the public art, we were in a sense rebuilding an audience and bringing them back to us. So I would have preferred to not have to do that. I would have preferred that we had the old model where the people came to us. But I think in the long run, this is going to make us stronger than ever because we'll have multiple ways of reaching people and multiple ways to build an audience.
So I came across this article, and then I want to get to Dennis, about art and ecology, which said that the artist is able to take greater risks than the scientist. So I don't know if you want to argue about that, but that's I'm just curious about whether you guys think it's true. But let Dennis respond to the constraints of building a community with so many different opinions.
The first thing I'd like to say is that we have discovered during this time of constraints how important community is to people, because we have really witnessed an increase in the number of people who bring themselves to the service, to the study group, to volunteer, to do social justice efforts. People seek out community. As my teacher, Rabbi Kaplan, would say, belonging precedes believing. People need that. And I think that that is at the core of the religious experience. In terms of constraints with religion, I think there are two types of religion. Religion with a small r and religion with a capital R. Religion with a capital R represents the institutional structures, both the physical, the structural, the doctrinal that you'll find more in some traditions than others. And that establishes norms and patterns. And then there is religion with a small r, which is a human inclination. It is just part of the human instinct. It manifests itself in different ways in different people. And I think that the art of being a religious leader is to find a way to blend the two, to bring the spiritual impetus to mesh with the community. Part of that also has to do, talking of constraints, the function of a religious leader and of a religious community is to provide two things. One is pastoral, comfort, healing. The other is prophetic, challenging, goading. And I think a religion has to have both, the pastoral and the prophetic. It has to comfort the afflicted, and it has to afflict those who are too comfortable. And that is the challenge always. I think we have discovered that at these times, the needs are still there. How we serve them has been the challenge. And what will determine, what will be the proof in the pudding is how things unfold after we can return to community.
Thank you. I have so many questions, but we have another part of our program, but I have to ask one because this is sort of very dear to me. You know, I write children's books and I love to tell stories to kids. And I know, and you all know, that children are inherently playful and creative and imaginative. So the question in general is play inherent in the creative process? And what happens when a child's delight in creating turns into fear of being judged and rejected? How can we, as an adult community, educate the younger generation to keep that, you know, inherent sense of wonder and playfulness that allows for creativity? I don't know anybody who wants to take that first. Nobody. No, I don't believe that.
So, Sandy, in a one sentence answer, that's why with ET, you never want to lose the magic. We all grow up and we lose our childhood magic way too early.
Yeah, when you mentioned climate change, I was going to say the kids are the most responsive to, you know, recycling and helping you notice the environment that you pass by in your hurry. So at that might help us in moving in that direction. Dennis, did you have something?
I would just say that I think that playfulness, I think I referenced this, playfulness is at the heart of the religious experience. And I think that if you want to see through spontaneous religiosity in the small r, just talk to kids. It's that expression of wonder, that need to connect, that ritual, celebrational dimension that is part of the experience. As we grow up, we lose a little bit of that sense of wonder, which is at the heart of the religious experience. But we also have to provide other aspects in community to transmit the values that we begin to implant on children as they grow up. And not only implant, they discover them. Many of these values don't have to be implanted. They just have to be
encouraged.
So I'll just say, years ago, we had a businessman give us money to, as a little venture fund. We called it an adventure fund for our interns to apply for money to do their projects. And the very first adventure fund, somebody asked, I was expecting $75, $25 applications. And one of the interns asked for $372 to build giant puppets. And I was like, wait a minute, what community need are you addressing? I was kind of asking him these hard questions. And he looked at me and he said, Indianapolis needs a spectacle of wonder. And he was building these giant puppets to pierce people's hearts, to give them the spectacle of wonder. And he built them, he took them down to the circle, he set them up, and people streamed out of their buildings. And the greatest thing that had happened that day was it made people really glad they lived in Indianapolis. And so ever since then, I think about my work and how do I bring a spectacle of wonder into people's lives?
That's wonderful. And I won't add there's so much. I just think sometimes we tend to reject kids and say, well, you can't sing, you can't play the instrument, you can't do this, and we don't allow them to grow into these experiences. Okay, so there was way more. Oh, there was only one quick question. Where did you get all the money for your projects, Joanna? That was a question.
So we made the decision to go into reserves. Our board had an emergency meeting. We met and we said, oh my goodness, if there's ever a time to invest in our artists, if there's ever a time to pay them to do things, is now. And so we did it, and we think the community responded well. Not every organization would make that same decision, but we decided that this was the time to invest. You know, the natural reaction is fear and to pull in and to not spend and to hide and to think about yourself. But we decided to do the opposite.
Thank you. Let us turn to the second section, this second part of our conversation, which is more hands-on experience. So the same person I quoted in my introduction, Joseph Boyce, said, the spaces we live in, the work we do, the conversations we have are all art, ways of building our social structure. In other words, so they say, we are all artists in some way or form, and we're going to test that here with three wonderful presenters who are going to engage us. I'm going to briefly mention each of them. Dr. Kate Neville is a board certified neurologist and neuro-oncologist who specializes in the care of patients with brain and spinal cord tumors. She has a medical degree from IU School of Medicine, completed a neurology residency at University of Virginia, and a neuro-oncology fellowship at the Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. And she is presently assistant professor of clinical neurology. Dr. Adam Henze is a researcher, educator, and spoken word artist of national and international renown. He is co-founder of Slam Camp, a summer writing academy for teenage poets, and a director of The Power of a Sentence, a writing workshop at Indianapolis's Women's Prison. He earned his PhD at IU, works as a research associate at Indiana Institute on Disability and Community. And this is amazing. I didn't even know there was official poet of the Indianapolis 500, but he is that. And program director of Southern Pride Poetry, which hosts the largest running poetry slam festival in the world. George Kelly is the educational director of Congregation Beth-El. He has been doing Jewish education for almost a quarter of a century and is currently chair of the Reconstructionist Educators of North America. George is dedicated to multi-faith encounters and education. He speaks often at area churches and schools. He is a wonderful storyteller and uses story in all his teaching. So we're delighted to have all of you here, and I believe Kate is first.
Right. Okay. So in my time, I'm going to be talking about the 5 senses and how our brain interprets and connects with the world. I'm obviously quite biased as a neurologist. I chose to specialize in neurology so I could learn about the wonder of the nervous system. And I have not been disappointed, as our brains, your brain, is amazing. And one of the most amazing things our brain does is interpret the world around us. From the moment someone is born, his, her, their brain connects and interprets 5 incredible senses: sight, form between specialized receptors, our neurons, and our brain. These 5 senses help us interpret the world around us. They keep us safe, and they connect with parts of our brain that elicit memory, emotion, sense of belonging, and joy and wonder. When we can't access a sense, or one sense is no longer functioning, other senses become much more important. We often take these special senses for granted until they are lost or not as easily accessible. We've all experienced this during COVID. We've all lost, to a certain degree, the touch to our peers. A friendly touch, a touch on the shoulder, a touch on the back, a hug from a friend, holding hands. All these things are done much less now given COVID and safety risks. Also related to the COVID-19 is that people who become infected often lose their sense of taste and smell, which sometimes recovers and sometimes does not recover fully. So we must be creative during these times to try to enhance these senses in other ways or maximize other senses that we have. I'm going to talk about 2 main senses today in light of time. So the first sense I'm going to talk about is touch or somatosensation. There are multiple steps that information must travel through to get to the brain. Specialized receptors that lie in our skin and deeper tissues interpret all types of external stimuli and make up the first step in the information pathway. These receptors encode the nature, location, intensity, and duration of that external stimuli. There are nociceptors, which interpret pain, thermoreceptors, which interpret temperature, and mechanoreceptors, which interpret vibration, pressure, light touch, stretch of muscles and tendons, and proprioception, which is the sense of position, knowing where your body is in space. This information can travel exceedingly fast to our brains at a speed as fast as 360 feet per second. The next step after the receptors is the dorsal root ganglion, the neuron cell body here right next to your spinal cord, that then extends a very long axon, much like a wire, up through your spinal cord until it reaches the brain. When it reaches the brain, it lands in an area of your brain called the thalamus, which is like the relay center or switchboard of our brains. And the thalamus decides where that information goes. And for sensation, I lost my mouse, that information goes to the somatosensory cortex. This information travels at different speeds. I mentioned that it can travel as fast as 360 feet per second, but the speed in which it travels and the time it takes to get from the external stimuli to your brain depends on 2 main factors. The length of time, so sensation from your foot takes longer to get to your brain than a sensation that's felt in your fingertips because that length is shorter or longer from your foot to your brain than your hand to your brain. And then insulation. Much like a wire, our nerves are insulated or not. And much like a wire, nerves that are insulated transmit information much more quickly than nerves that are not insulated. So for example, pain fibers and axons typically are not insulated, while proprioception or position sense fibers are heavily insulated. So you may think back in your own life, if you touch something that's hot, it may take you an extra second before you pull your hand away because that information travels much more slowly to your brain than position or joint sense, like when you're walking and you walk on an uneven pebble and your body's able to quickly adapt. Physical touch can have a powerful impact on many realms, and there are lots of social science studies that show us this. There are studies that show the more athletes high five or hug their teammates, the better they perform in their game, that a supportive touch can make patients like their doctors more, and a teacher that touches a student on the arm or back often results in the student being more likely to participate in class. Pleasant physical touch increases release of oxytocin, which is an important neuropeptide in our brain that promotes feelings of bonding and makes you feel more trusting and connected. This is the same neuropeptide that's released between parents and children during childbirth and when kids are born to promote the connection between parents and their child. This leads to a cascade that lowers the blood pressure and heart rate, making you feel more soothed. It also decreases levels of cortisol, which is a stress hormone. Furthermore, the signals of the sensory input travel from the primary somatosensory cortex, which you see here, to the orbital frontal cortex. The orbital frontal cortex is an area of our brain that's very important in emotion and in feelings of connectedness and in decision-making and behavior. Touch is so important to our physical and mental well-being. And during a time like COVID, we may need to get more creative about maximizing safe, pleasant physical touch in our lives. The next sense that I'm going to talk about is olfaction, or the sense of smell. The olfactory receptors receive and interpret smells in the way of molecules and transmit them to the olfactory vesicle, which is much like a soft bristled brush over which odorants diffuse across and stimulate the chemosensitive olfactory receptors. This then travels to the olfactory bulb, which then goes back to the olfactory tract to the olfactory cortex. The nerve of the olfactory system is not insulated. Thus, this information is among the slowest moving in the entire nervous system at 0.3 feet per second. Much like taste receptors, the olfactory receptors are replaced throughout life every 1 to 2 months. This is very different than a lot of the other receptors in our body that are lifelong or are replaced at much slower rates. And our nervous system can distinguish 1 trillion different odors, far more than the number of tones we can hear or colors we can see. The olfactory cortex projects via the thalamus, again, that relay center in your brain, to the limbic structures, the hippocampus, which is the memory center of our brain, and the amygdala, which has a strong role in emotion, emotional memory, and behavior. So essentially, your brain interprets what you smell, and then in the olfactory cortex, and then relays that smell to areas of your brain that associates the smell with memories and emotions tied to people, places, or events. So before the event today, I think everybody got an email asking them to bring something that smells, that brings a memory. So I'm gonna ask everybody, if your cameras are on, to hold that up, your item up, and in the chat box to share, if you will, what your smell is and what memory you associate that smell with, and if it brings a certain emotion, if you're willing to share.
Do you want to stop sharing your screen so we can see
Oh,
everything?
yeah. I didn't know how that worked. Okay, there we go. I really love all these things that people are sharing. I'm gonna read a few. Somebody wrote, I brought matches. It reminds me of camping with my dad and brother. Somebody wrote, lilacs on the bush take me back to spending time with my great grandmother. Another person said, I have constant comment tea with milk and sugar, memories of time with mom as a kid. And somebody wrote, I think of chicken soup simmering on the stove, memories of holidays, home, and family. Smell of cigar smoke from the living room of my grandparents' house while all my uncles sat, smoked, and talked about the stock. The smell of the cork grease I used on my clarinet that I had played for decades reminds me of the concerts I had played. I love all these. Somebody wrote cinnamon sticks because they make them feel comfortable and relaxed. Honeysuckles reminding someone of the house where they went swimming and when they were young. And chocolate reminds someone of their mom's homemade chocolate chip cookies. And I love all those examples. And it's interesting because a lot of these examples bring people back to memories of childhood, which also has been shown that smells, particularly smells that are associated with a very strong emotion or memory, typically are associated with memories and emotions that were formed before we were 10 years old. So I think I just had one more slide that I don't really need to go back and show, but I just was going to end by saying, you know, during this time of the pandemic, some of these things are lost or temporarily suppressed. So it's important that we try to enhance our touch in other ways by holding hands more with somebody who is a cohabitant in your home, or hugging more, or holding on to your pet, giving them an extra scratch behind their ear, or finding, if you don't live with somebody or a pet, then pulling out maybe your child's old lovey and rubbing that to fill your somatosensory cortex and your orbital frontal cortex and release that oxytocin. And then stop to smell the good smells and make new memories with smells, making a new meal or doing a new project that involves smell, like Joanna's example of the soaps, which was so lovely.
Thank you so much, Kate. That was lovely. That was really nice. I love all those smells. We're going to turn now to Adam.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the organizers for having me be a part of this really, really incredible panel. And also thank you for everyone for sticking around late. I'm going to share my screen so you can see some of my prompts. And I'm hoping you're going to be a little interactive with me today. I realize it's late. I have some small asks for you. And one reason I'm really thankful everyone's staying here is because if you're like me, Monday's my like Zoom gauntlet. I've just been like tied to my screen constantly. I'm seeing some nodding head from some other faculty and some other people who are probably tied to their computer screens a little too much. And I think that people characterize Zoom as a bad thing or a good thing. And I think it's just something that we need to be mindful of. So we're going to talk about mindfulness and writing today and how we can use writing as a form of reflection and even as a form of meditation if you're into something like that. So I have a quick mindfulness mission for you. For me, I think it's really important to just step away from your screen sometime. So I'm going to ask you to turn your chair or just get your screen outside of your peripheral vision. Don't leave because we got another great guest after this. But maybe just take a minute or two to look away. Fixate on something that it's away from a screen. I know in my view, I can see some very specific images. I see a coffee pot that is stained with coffee grounds that I probably need to clean a little bit better. I see an old bonsai tree that is potted by my window. It's a little bit less green than it was a couple months ago. But pick one image like that, and I want you to describe it. You can either write it down or keep it in your head. So I want you to describe it in detail and take just a minute to do that. So I took 30 seconds to describe the stack of board games that I haven't been playing with. So I wrote that they are covered with dust, some with frayed edges, some are still in the shrink wrap, some are colorful and bright, some are stacked on the shelf, and all of them are not open, they're all put away. I really just took 30 seconds to jot that descriptions down about one image. So do that now, just find one image, write a list of descriptions, stretch out your limbs, and then come back in 120 seconds. All right, your time's about half up. Start finishing up your list. Get 3 descriptions, 4 descriptions, 5 descriptions. That's all great. I know this is a very quick exercise. Hopefully, in your own time, you can have more time for mindfulness. We only have a couple minutes this time. So finish up your list, start getting back to your computer. We can talk about your awesome images. All right, as you're wrapping up, I really love images as a writer and as a poet because I think that they are just a good way to reflect on all kinds of different practices. Relishing over images is very scientific. It also has a religious base to it. There's a reverence and there's just getting away from your screen. So we're going to talk about how we can turn some of these images into a work of art. And we're going to do haiku because what else are you going to do during a 10-minute writing workshop? So, if you never write a haiku again after tonight, that's okay with me. I personally love haiku, but this is just a way to replicate a small activity. And hopefully you can take that home and build something bigger. You can write something that is a journal, an essay, a different type of poem. You can make film, you can make art. And all of these things are based on images. And we're going to talk about the mindfulness practice. So I know some people know haiku and some people probably don't know haiku. I know that a lot of us learned about haiku like in first grade and kindergarten. They call it kindergarten haiku, and they maybe gave you some rules. So if you remember the rules that your teacher taught you about haiku, I like the haiku rules, type them in the chat and help me out. Remember what your first grade teacher taught you about haiku. What did they basically say? So I know some people probably remember that it's Japanese, that it's a Japanese art form. I know that some people probably remember, it's 3 lines, right? 5, 7, 5. I see we've got a chat up. I don't know if I can see the chat actually. So I'll guess that people are commenting in the chat. So 3 lines, 5 syllables, 7 syllables, then 5 syllables. That's what a lot of people learn about haiku. But for me, that practice in kindergarten doesn't really reflect on a meditative practice. I don't really feel serene or calmed down when I write haiku that way. And obviously, it might mean that we are just taught it a dumb way in our education system. So I'm going to take a different look at haiku, and then we're going to come back to your list and see if we can maybe turn your image into a haiku. So 2 rules that we didn't learn about haiku from our kindergarten teacher who had us counting on our fingers is the kigo word and the cut. And these really get more to the heart of haiku that the Japanese masters did way back in the day, rather than just doing 5, 7, 5, like counting on our fingers. So the first is called a kigo word. So in Japanese, in the Japanese language, a kigo word is basically any reverence to the seasons, the environment, space, and time. And that's where these images are very, very important because they provide a setting and all of us can see these images. And even though we have different internal processes and we have emotions that we're not sure if the other experiences, we all have these same images. So cherry blossoms, sunsets, you see those in a lot of haiku. One of my favorite is Kobayashi Issa. He said, "If things were better for me, flies, I'd invite you to share my supper." So Kobayashi Issa was a Buddhist. He lived in poverty. So instead of focusing on his poverty, he focused on a fly. So that's what his kigo word that he used. So another thing is called the cut. In a lot of different type of Eastern writing, it's much less linear than Western writing. So you might have one image set next to another image. So one of my favorite is by Taigu Ryokan. Burglars ransacked his hut. Everything was stolen. Everything was everywhere. And he wrote, "The thief left it behind, the moon at my window." So you have a cut of seeing his hut all ransacked, and then there's still that crystal clear moon in the window. I guess the thief forgot to take the moon out of his window when he stole that as well. So those are two practices that aren't quite as part of the 575 haiku that we hear. And the harder part is that it's hard to write a haiku that's not in Japanese. Japanese is a syllable based language, while English is a syllable stress based language. We have different characters in our alphabet. So often the best haiku don't even match up to that 575 syllable count that your kindergarten teacher often wrote about. One of my favorite haikus by Matsuo Basho: "This road, no one goes down it. Autumn evening." So you've got a cut in there. We've got these two images placed side by side. And then we've got this really powerful Kigo word of autumn evening. All of us have gone down that road. Perhaps this road is regret. Perhaps it is doing something that is right, but is hard. And often we think about that on an autumn evening. So you're going to write a haiku today. So you can remember the rules that your teacher taught you. 17 syllables or less, if you want to do less than that. No titles, and then try to remember to have a cut as well. And remember, you're going to take this image and focus on that and create something that's really cool. So before I give you some time to turn your image into a haiku, I just have one little bit of advice. The goal of a haikuster is to make the crowd say, ah, ha, or aha. So I've got a couple examples of that. So Richard Wright, one of our great American writers, he wrote Native Son. He wrote haiku at the end of his life. He wrote a great haiku. He wrote, "It was so silent that the silence protested with one lone bird cry." It's an image that just makes me go, ah. And you can turn on your images from your kitchen or your dining room or your office into something like that. Another one is ha. So love telling jokes for haiku. And I wrote this one. So here's my ha haiku. Hopefully it makes you laugh. Junk food addiction. I tried a 12-step program, but fat kids hate steps. So that's my joke about junk food. Hopefully it makes people go ha. And then finally there is aha. This is what's called the eureka moment in a haiku. So this is by author Kent Foreman. He goes, "Oh, she wants me to love her the way she would love her if she was me." And that's an aha moment that someone wrote in a haiku. So I want you to just take one of your images that you wrote about and use this as a cool down activity. Often when I'm on Zoom, or if I'm in an endless meeting, or if I have to talk with other people and I just feel like I've been on all the time, sometimes I take a personal time to just cool down. So I want you to turn one of the images from your haiku in your description, count on your fingers if you want to, and try to make your own haiku. And I'm going to give you a couple minutes to do this before we move on to our last speaker and our questions. But I turned my list of my board games into a haiku. And I was really just thinking about, I can't use my board games because my family, my friends aren't gone. So I wrote, boxes of board games stacked on shelf, covered in dust, no game night this year. So I just took literally 60 seconds to turn one of my images into that haiku. And I have a lot of practice of this, so if you fumble at it, don't worry about it. But I just want you to take, hopefully, Rabbi Sasso, if I have 2 minutes, we have 2 minutes to have everyone compose their haiku. And if you want to share it in the chat, you can, or even better, if you have Twitter, Instagram, or if you have Facebook, share your haiku online with the hashtag Spirit and Place Festival 2020.
Adam, just one thing, we need to finish by 9, or so I was told. So we have only 9 minutes. I know there's another presentation. This is not the best way to do this, but could we go on, and while people are...
I love that. I think that's a great idea. So yeah,
people are thinking they could add their words to the chat box.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's a great practice too, because writing, we're always just trying to fit it in where we can. So we don't have time for writing now. So take your image, and then hopefully if you feel inspired tonight, type it in the chat or share it. And that's it for me. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. That was wonderful. That's a great exercise to do. Just whenever we have time and we're staring at the walls of our house.
Thank you. And did you take my screen away? Is that okay?
I did not do anything. I
Okay.
don't know what
Am I-
happened.
Okay, that's fine.
Fine. And I am going to ask George, I'm sorry that we're all constrained with time, but this was a very rich conversation. So George, you want to share with us? I can't see you. I don't know where you went.
Am I here?
Okay. So I give you 7
I'll
minutes.
go as fast as I can. Okay. So when COVID started, one of the things that amazed me was right away, people had to learn how to wash their hands. If somebody was in early childhood at any time, they already knew this, that washing your hands for 20 seconds gets rid of all the germs. But what we found is that if you were out in public and you were in a public restroom, you would see full-grown people standing at the sink going A, B, C, D, E, F, because they were learning to wash their hands and it became ritualistic. And that's actually what happened with hand washing in the ancient world. It was something to clean, and yet eventually it moved to become a ritual in many different religious traditions. So tonight, I was going to start by painting a ceramic bowl. I've already started painting some of it with a pattern, but I was going to paint a ceramic bowl that would be used as a hand washing bowl. And if you bought one, join me in this process. If you didn't, you can either go and get something and think about how you would decorate it, or if you have glass and acrylic paint, you can even do it with this. This came from Pottery by You. We'll paint it with the special glazing paint that they have, and it needs to be fired. So I want to do a little bit, I'm just going to do a little bit of painting before I go on. So the inside of the bowl I've already painted. You'll need to put several coats on, but I'm going to put a big circle right in the middle, and it's going to take a little bit of time that we don't really have, but I'm going to put a big circle right in the middle of the bowl. Now, many of you know the late great Bob Ross. When it comes to painting, we can always wind up moving a little too fast and a little too anxious, and whoops, the paint goes outside the line we thought we were going to be in. But remember what Bob used to teach us: there are no mistakes, just happy accidents. So you can go ahead and paint your bowl, and later you would take it back to Pottery by You to get fired. And the thing is about painting this bowl is that you make it your own. And so often people say they can't paint, or they can't draw, or they can't tell stories, or they can't sing. And that's because somebody else told them that. It was mentioned earlier about kids who want to be creative and are innately creative. If you pay a kid to be creative and then you withdraw the payment, they become less creative. Creativity has to come from the inside. It's an emotional thing. But why are we talking about hand washing in the origins of creativity? Well, the creativity comes from the fact that, as I said earlier, hand washing as a functional thing for health and safety became a ritual thing, as it was used in the ancient temple in Judaism by the priests. They would prepare themselves by washing their hands, not only washing off the dirt of the day, but creating a ritual that created a sense of spiritual purity. After the destruction of the temple and the rise of both the synagogue and the home as a center of Jewish living, the dinner table in a Jewish home replaced the temple, and the washing of hands on a Friday night that happens as part of the ritual as we prepare for a holiday or for Shabbat is something that harkens back to the ritual time of the priests and gets us ready. In fact, the blessing for washing our hands is the Hebrew, and I'm just going to do the end of it, is al nitilat yadayim, often translated as concerning the washing of hands, but what it really means is the elevating of the hands to make them more holy. And Nachman of Bratslav talked about this and said that the hands are actors, are moral actors on the world. And we can do good with our hands, like giving charity or helping a friend, or we can do bad by hitting somebody or destroying something. So the hands become really important in Judaism. And so the washing of hands becomes something that elevates us and brings us into a holy place. So what does that have to do with a bowl and painting a bowl and making it pretty? Well, the thing is that in Judaism, there is something called Hiddur Mitzvah. It's this idea of elevating the mitzvah to make it more special. You can wash your hands in anything. You can make any blessing, a Kiddush blessing over wine in a paper cup, but it elevates it when we in fact create something that's beautiful, because it shows honor to ourselves and honor to God. And I think that that's an important part of when we express ourselves in ritual, that we express ourselves in our best possible way. So I'm trying to cut this incredibly short so we're done on time. So I just want to say that hand washing is not the purview of Jews, though it is an important part of who we are as a people. There's a lot of different religious traditions that use hand washing, and you'll see it. In the Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church, before the consecration of the Eucharist, the turning of bread and wine into the body and blood of Jesus in their ritual, the priest will symbolically wash his hands. And it's an incredible moment to watch in the service. In Islam, there's a whole lot of religious imperatives, if you will, around hygiene and washing. When it comes to prayer, and Muslims pray 5 times a day, there is a series of ablutions to cleanse oneself, including washing hands and washing feet. And so these faith traditions develop these different ways of expressing themselves through washing. In Buddhism, while there isn't a ritual practice around prayer, there are 2 that are interesting: the pouring of water on the dead before cremation in order to demonstrate a forgiveness of each other between the dead and the living. Water is a way of bridging a gap between those 2. And then in the occasion of the new year, young people will pour some water over the hands of the elderly to wish them good health for the coming year, as part of Buddhist tradition of honoring their elders. Many faith traditions have washing as part of their tradition. And what's interesting as we talk about the origins of creativity, oftentimes you'd think about some of these rituals growing out of a necessity. And one of them I'm thinking of is the washing of feet. In Islam, in Christianity, the washing of feet is something that is part of ritual. But when in the ancient Near East, it was also part of the idea of welcoming a stranger into your home who's a traveler. And if you're a traveler in the Near East, that is a lot of desert, you've probably got sand between your toes, and you would come into the house and you would washed. The feet would be washed as a way of welcoming you into the home and giving you a sense of refreshment, of resting from the weariness of travel. And so what you find is that as those simple things happen, they become ritualized over time. And those little actions take on a whole new meaning when they become ritualized. And so I didn't spend a whole lot of time painting my bowl. I've only gotten started. What I will tell you about painting is don't give up. Try what you can. Make your patterns. You're going to paint it several times. It needs several layers. I was going to try and do a couple tonight, but I want to get us out of here in a timely fashion. But just like any good cooking show, I'm well prepared that something is already done. Once it's finished and it's taken to the kiln and it's all glazed, the bowl will go from being dull like this to being vibrant and glazed and wonderful. So I know that was short. I hope that if you have any questions, you can ask. I think we'll have a couple of minutes to ask questions. But I hope you enjoyed tonight. This was a wonderful opportunity to explore the origins of creativity, through all these different modalities. And quite frankly, I'm proud to have been part of it. So thank you very much.
Thank you, George. I really appreciate it. I'm sorry to have pressed you for time, but you managed to be creative within constraints, which is what this is all about. And I saw some beautiful haikus as well in a short time, which is quite lovely. So actually we're hoping to do this in person, and we would have gone and we could have each done something in a big auditorium, but we have managed to be creative within this time and to be together and still create. So I want to thank you all for being here, to thank our speakers, Larry, Dennis, Joanna, and to thank Kate and Adam and George, to thank also Jackie for keeping us all on task. This has been, and thank Spirit and Place for allowing us to do this program. Have a wonderful evening, keep creating, and don't forget, as I am reminded, to complete the survey under the feedback tab so that Spirit and Place will know what you thought of this program and whether you would like more things like this. Thank you all for joining us. Take care.